Okay, and we're back with Steve Meyer, former Capitol Records promotion guy for Florida, and then later for the U.S. And in part one of our conversation, we were talking about, at the tail end of it, we were talking about how your position and your responsibilities expanded from South Florida all the way up to the northern part of the state as well, and included other markets like Jacksonville and Tampa. But you told me, it started to tell a story about Little River Band and how a Jacksonville station helped you break that in Florida, and then ultimately nationally. So could we pick up the story there and tell me how that happened?
Sure. One of the greatest things about being promotion guy back then was it was the formative years of album-oriented radio. And one of the greatest thrills I had was listening to the music and carrying it to those stations. One of the albums that had come in it was 76. I don't remember if it was early or mid 76. But anyway, it was the first Little River Band album, and there was a track on there called "It's a Long Way There." I had listened to it at home, as I did all my new product, and I found it to be incredible. Their harmonies were magnificent, a la Crosby, Stills, Nash type stuff. And there was a track on there, a very long track. I think it was 8 minutes long. I'm not really sure, but it was called "It's a Long Way There," and just a beautiful song, a beautiful track. Almost hypnotic. And I took it upon myself to carry that to radio. In the course of doing that, one of the program directors I took it to was a guy named Bill Bartlett, and he programmed WAIV in Jacksonville at the time. He listened to it, and he said, "I really like this. I'm going to take it home tonight and listen to it some more." He called me the next day and said, "This track is incredible." He said, "I actually played it. And I played it again and again. And he said, by the time the evening was over, I couldn't get it out of my head. And I just thought it was magnificent. And I'm going to put it in a rotation." He did. The phone started lighting up. Retail started happening. And he took it upon himself to actually call stations in the region, as well as in Florida, and tell them about this. He said, "I just want to let you know." And I'm not being... nobody's putting me up for this. I've got a great track here that's blowing out. It's this track by Little River Band. And he convinced a lot of people. He was like my co-pilot in the state. And I went from market to market. It went from Jacksonville to Pensacola, to Tallahassee, to Orlando, to Daytona, to Tampa, to Lakeland, all the way down, all the way to Miami. And by the time it got into rotation at all those album radio stations, it really started selling the album. In fact, the album started selling almost as well as an album would have sold had it been a hit single. So it launched them in the state. And right during that time, I had the offer to go to the Tower and be promoted to national promotion manager and work with Bruce Wendell. And I accepted it. And when I got into the Tower, I kept telling everybody the story about Little River Band and how this track had done what it did. And of course, it was way too long to be a single at that point. And our album promotion manager, national, was Ray Tuscan, one of the best album promotion people in the industry. He took it upon himself to really spread it at album radio, and it started to work. And lo and behold, it had a foothold at album radio. The idea then became, how do we capitalize on this? So Ray Tuscan and our famous engineer producer at the Tower, may he rest in peace, John Palladino, whose nickname was Mr. Snips, they went into the studio and they did an edit, and they brought the record down from 8 something to 4 minutes in a few seconds. I don't remember exactly.
8:39 to 4:16.
There you go. They cut it in half.
Yeah.
So we took that And by this time, the staff was really, really jazzed on Little River Band as well. So we took it to Top 40 Radio. And even though it was over the unwritten 3-minute and 30-second rule at Top 40 Radio, we got a nice little foundation at Top 40 Radio, and the record ended up going Top 40. It might have gone Top 30. I don't remember. I think it peaked in the 30s. But it established Little River Band at Top 40 Radio at many stations. And all those stations that played it would commented and said, this is a great band. We love their harmonies. We love their music. And of course, the result was after that, they went back in the studio with a great producer named John Boylan, who had produced everybody from Boston to Linda Ronstadt and a myriad of other people. And they just delivered after that, hit after hit after hit.
Yep. Yep. It was top 30, made it to number 28.
There you go.
Just for the record. So you land at the Tower. You basically grew up in the New York area and went to college in South Florida, and then you moved to California.
Correct.
Tell me what it was like walking into the Tower the first time.
Incredibly imposing. When you walked into that lobby back then, Florida ceiling gold records, and gold records from every major artist that had ever recorded on Capitol, from the Beatles to Frank Sinatra, to the Beach Boys,
Nat King Cole too.
Nat King, you name it, and like everybody.
50 feet high. It wasn't like it was like 50 feet high. So they were like,
yeah, it was really imposing, and it gave me chills to know that I was going to be working in a building where these records had come from. They had come from this great company, and it was just an amazing, amazing feeling. And as I'd come in the back door. And as I came in the back door, I walked down the hall to go to the lobby. And of course, you walk right by the Capitol Studios,
right,
where everybody had recorded as well. And there was actually music coming out of one of the studios. I don't remember what it was, but it was an experience that I remember to this very, very day. And it was just, it was a wonderful feeling. And once I got to the 8th floor where I was working, it kind of just became an all-encompassing feeling because everybody there was so gracious.
Well, you mentioned you're working with Bruce Wendell and Ray Tuscan. Who are some of the other folks that were on the promotion staff when you got there?
Well, that's the national staff. The national staff was Ray Tuscan as albums, me as Top 40 Pop, and Bruce Wendell was the VP over both of us. But locally, I worked with the whole staff. Bruce had given me the authority to basically direct the staff on a day-to-day basis, and he oversaw all the strategy, and he also spoke to the staff. He ran the conference calls at that point, but on a day-to-day basis, I was calling the staff, and we had great promotion people. And a lot of the people were groomed by working in this. We also had, I don't want to forget about it, we had 2 wonderful ladies in the Tower that did secondary promotion for Gavin radio stations, the smaller market stations. Mm-hmm. One was named Susan Scharf, who eventually became our LA promotion manager. I think she was the first female promotion manager for Capitol. And then the other one was Sandra Hill. And they built records up in the secondary market to facilitate our local staff. So they would go to the stations that reported to the littler tip sheets and get a base for us. And if the record had any legs, we'd then take it to the Billboard and the bigger stations, and we had a story to tell. So you could actually go and build a record off the smaller stations, go to the bigger stations, and hopefully make it a national hit. So they were incredible as well. And the whole staff back then, we, pound for pound, I don't think we had as many people as our competitors. I think CBS might have had the biggest staff, And then the Warner Group had a huge staff, but pound for pound, we delivered. And the amount of records that we did deliver was staggering.
Well, and then and among the artists that you worked with, kind of more closely than others, was Bob Seger. And there's a great story regarding Night Moves and how that was his breakthrough hit and what your involvement was with that. Can you kind of tell us that story?
Yeah, my involvement was I was in the tower working late one night, about 6:30, 7 o'clock, and Punch had come up from one of the studios downstairs where they were mastering the Night Moves album. And he had an acetate. And he said, would you like to hear some stuff? And I said, absolutely.
This
Put
is
it on.
Punch
And
Andrews, his producer manager.
yes, he was Bob's manager. Yeah. And he put the acetate on and it started playing. And during the course of listening to the acetate, Punch said to me, do you mind if I use your secretary's phone? I've got to make a few phone calls. And I said, no, go right ahead. I'll continue listening. And while I was listening, the Night Moves track came on. And I don't remember the order of the tracks. And I don't know if the order of the tracks was what the final order was at retail. But anyway, when that song came on, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. And I started listening, and the story and was so engaging, and the lyrics were incredible. And when it was over, I said to myself, this is it. This is the record. Punch was still outside my office. What I immediately did was I grabbed a blank cassette and I stuck it in the cassette machine. We all had those back in our offices back then. Put the song back on, played it again, and recorded it unbeknownst to Punch. And when he finally did come back in, I said to him, look, Punch, this song, this is it. This is the song. This is going to be, in my opinion, his biggest hit, and it's going to break him. Oh, yeah, well, Bob likes rock and roll songs to be his calling. And I said, yeah, but, he's going to get his rock and roll airplay at Album Radio, and Michigan, it won't make any difference. He'll sell whatever. But he really, really needs a hit single to break him open nationally. And this is it. And during the course of our conversation, Bob had walked in my office and saw my pictures on the wall. My pictures on the wall were Bruce Springsteen, a Columbia artist. And he looked at me and he said, oh, you're a Springsteen fan? I said, yeah, so are you. You called Born to Run the pivotal album of the 70s so far. And he said, how do you know that? And I said, because I read Rolling Stone too. And he said, oh, yeah. I said, I'm just talking to Punch here about this album. I really, really, this track, Night Moves. And he kind of nodded. And I said, we really got to put this out. I mean, this is it. And he excused himself. He said, I got to go back to the studio and finish up. And Punch was there. And I said to Punch, I'm telling you. Okay, well, let's get together with everybody and we'll talk about it. And he left my office. I called Bruce Wendell at home. I said, Bruce, I got to come to your house right now and play you this Bob Seger song immediately. He said, Steve, I'm going to dinner in 15 minutes with Paul Drew. Paul Drew at that time was the vice president of programming for the RKO radio chain. 6 or 7 key radio stations all over the United States. I said, wait, it's worth it. I drove over to his house. I played him the song, and he said, he was knocked out. He said, I'm going to play it for Drew and get an idea, see what he did. And he ended up doing that. And Paul Drew actually he said, oh, hey, give it to me and I'll test it right now. I'll give it to one of our stations. And Bruce said, no, it's not even finished. You're hearing it off of a test pressing. But of course, we inside the tower, Bruce, myself, Don Zimmerman, the president, John Carr, everybody that was on the Bob Seger team cajoled him. And that ended up being the single. That it ended up being a monster hit single for his first one, and took the album more than platinum. And it was the record of the year that year in Rolling Stone.
Well, was the album titled Night Moves at that time?
Was the album what?
Was the album titled Night Moves at the time?
Yeah, I believe it was.
And
If it had an alternate title initially, I don't remember.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, that was recorded in part in Studio B. I remember going down to Studio B when that was in progress, and actually other sessions down there, and Punch would have tape all over across the entire console to make sure that nobody futzed with any of the settings or dials overnight until they got there for the next session. It's pretty funny. Anyway, that's a whole other movie. But so that kind of put you in a more of an A&R kind of space as a promotion guy. You're where you start to be able to call singles, and there was a certain, I guess Bob and Punch after that listened to you when you said, hey, this should be the single. How did that develop, your relationship with them as far as helping them to choose their singles going forward?
Well, it happened because I was in constant communication during the promotion of the single, with Punch. Punch would call every week and ask how's it doing, how do you think it's going to go, et cetera, et cetera. And during the course of those many conversations, as that single had reached its peak, we started talking about follow-ups, and I gave him my viewpoint. My viewpoint was always based on the fact that I never forgot that when I was a local promotion man, and before that, where did I hear all my hits? Well, 99% of them were on the radio, and the majority of those were in a car radio. And I remember how much hearing a certain magic song on my radio at that point affected me. Sometimes it made me go right out and buy a record. So I always listened for those songs that I thought were engaging, lyrically, melodically, and that they would have that same impact when they went on the radio. So over the course of our relationship, I just became very vocal, and I would give Punch my reasons for saying, this is what I think is the first single. I like Fire Lake, and why do you like it? And then I would give him a myriad of reasons why I liked it. And when I left Capitol in May of '83, it coincided with Bob being on the cover of Musician magazine, playing a ukulele on the cover. And he actually credited me with picking his singles up until the day I left in '83.
And what was the highest chart position that his Capitol singles reached?
The highest single he had for a month at #2 was Shame on the Moon, which ironically, but I didn't know this, by the way, when I heard the record. Again, I heard it on an acetate first. But when I heard that song and immediately felt it was going to be a very, very big female hit. And I just liked the melody and I liked the lyrics. And I did not know at that time that Bob didn't write it. It was a Rodney Crowell song. But anyway, it went to #2 and it stayed there for a month.
And Like a Rock was another one that you had a hand in, right?
Not while I was at Capitol. After I left Capitol, I stayed in touch with Punch.
Right.
And he had called me at MCA.
You're at MCA, right? Okay.
Yeah, I had now gone to MCA. And he called me and he said, listen, I've got a new Seger album coming out, and I'd like your input. I just like your ears on it. And I said, sure. We went to dinner. I took him up to my house in Laurel Canyon. We sat and listened to the record. And again, I don't remember if the sequence of songs was the same as what ended up on the commercial copy. But anyway, I heard some songs, and a few of them were good. I didn't think any of them as hit singles until this other song came on. And when it came on and I started listening to the lyrics, I had almost the same reaction I did when I heard Night Moves. And I stopped the turntable after that song. And I said to Punch, well, I don't know what single they're going to pick for you, but if I was your promotion man and if I was still at Capitol and sitting in that chair, that song right there is the song. It's incredible. It's almost like a Night Moves. That song was like a rock. And he put his head down kind of, and he said, well, they don't want to put out a ballad, a mid-tempo ballad. I said, why not? And he said, well, they convinced Bob, and they've overdone it with me. And they said the reason that they don't want that is because the Distance album, which had Shame on the Moon and Roll Me Away, didn't perform in sales as well as his previous albums. And they blamed it on the fact that Shame on the Moon was a ballad. And I said, how could they blame his lack of sales in a
single?
Yeah, I said, are you kidding me? We've Got Tonight, all his Still the Same, Against the Wind. They're all mid-tempo ballads. Anyway, they didn't put that out for the first single. They put out a song called American Storm, which was the original title of the album. And it mid-charted, and Like a Rock came out, and lo and behold, success.
Like a Rock certainly generated a lot of mailbox money later on when it became used in many commercials over many years too.
Yeah, it's an amazing song, and people still talk about it, and it's one of the highlights when he toured, and it's one of the legendary singles.
Now, you were involved in his first #1 single, right?
His only #1 single.
Okay, well, that's a great story too. How did that happen?
Well, I'm at MCA now, and I get a phone call in my office, and it was my boss, Irving Azoff, who I think everybody knows who Irving Azoff is. But if they don't, he was the manager and still is of the Eagles. He had produced Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Urban Cowboy. He's now the head of MCA Records and Music. And he called me and he said, Stevie, please come over to my office. I want to play you something. So I walked over to his office, and the first thing he says is, how would you like to promote Bob Seger? And I went, are we signing Bob Seger? And he went, no. He said, we're not signing him, but we had the soundtrack to Beverly Hills Cop 1, and we had 2 monster singles, Axel F and The Heat Is On. And there's a new song here, and they offered it to Glenn Frey, and he doesn't want to do it, or he couldn't do it. I don't remember exactly. But Glenn suggested they give it to Bob Seger. And that song was Shakedown. And the original version, I think, was written by Keith Forsey and someone else. And with Bob's participation, he changed a lot of the lyrics. And what else, I don't know. But when he delivered that record and I heard it, I immediately knew it was a hit. And having nothing, movie or not, it was going to be a hit. And I told him, I said, it's going to be a top 10 record. I at that time, I didn't know about #1, but I got to tell you that it was a thrill for me after all those years at Capitol and my relationship with him and Punch to give him a #1 record in Billboard magazine.
Yeah, for sure. Well, now, jumping back to Capitol, there were other artists that you were directly involved with in terms of breakthrough hits. Juice Newton and Silver Spur was a group that was there. I think they were that was in 77 or 78, first record there. And you had something to do with her breakthrough hit, correct?
Yeah, one of the great things about Capitol was the synergy between the A&R and the promotion people was incredible. I mean, we had such great A&R people in-house between John Carter and Bruce Raven and Garfield and Bruce Garfield and Rupert Perry,
Richard Landis,
Richard Landis, and the whole crew. And
Columbia.
we always talked to each other frequently about, you know, projects they were working on, what's in the pipe and what's coming. Richard Landis walked into my office one day and sat down on the couch. And he said, "Hey, man, I'm cutting this girl on the label. And I'm looking for an idea for maybe a cover song for the album. Do you have any ideas?" And I said, "Yeah, I actually do." I suggested in some meeting a while back, why don't we have Anne Murray cut Angel of the Morning? And I don't know where that went, but it went nowhere. And I said, that's my suggestion. And he said, "Well, what's so special about that song?" I said, "Well, the story was always incredible to me, and the melody was terrific." I said, "You know, when I heard the record back in '67 and '68, I loved it, but I thought there was something missing. Not being a producer, I don't know what that was, but I just loved the record lyrically and melodically and thought it could have been better." And he said, "You know what? I'm going to cut it. Please don't suggest that to anybody else." And I said, "Well, okay." Several weeks later, he came up to my office and he said, "Can I borrow you for 15 minutes and take you down to the studio?" And I said, "Well, sure." And he took me down to the studio and he queued up Angel of the Morning and he played it for me. And I knocked my socks off. And I looked at him and I said, I can't believe this. I can't believe what you did with this record. It was almost like a Phil Spector record to me, the way he had done the percussion and the strings and everything. And
full-blown production.
Yeah. And I said, "When is this coming?" And he said, "I'm finishing up the album. And as soon as it's done, I said, "That's it. That's the single." And I came back upstairs, went right into my boss's office, went right into Bruce Wendell's office. And I said, "Bruce, I just heard a smash. Landis recorded Juice, and it's going to be a hit." And by the way, Juice and Silver Spur had been managed at that time by one of the industry's best managers, may he rest in peace, Ed Leffler.
Sorry, there was a glitch there. Ed Leffler was the gentleman's name. Yes, he also managed Sammy Hagar.
Yeah, and he also had The Sweet at Capitol.
Right.
And he ended up managing Van Halen later on.
Right. Well,
so we put that out, and that took the album to platinum. It was a number 1 or 2 single in a myriad of trades, and that launched her career.
It was number 1 Billboard adult contemporary and number 4 Billboard Hot 100.
Yeah, I think it went to number 1 or 2 in Record World or Cashbox.
And it crossed over country too. It was like a top. It was number 22 country, and that was a big market for her later on.
So, well, Queen of Hearts also got country play.
Yep. And
I think she even got it on the 3rd single, "The Sweetest Thing."
Yes. Very good. Very good. All right. Well, at kind of I guess one of the latter part of your tenure there at Capitol, one of the groups that you were knocked out by was the Knack. And I remember there was a story you told me about going to see them for the first time. The aforementioned Bruce Raven dragged you down to the Troubadour. Tell us that story.
Well, I was again, Bruce came down to my office and said to me, "You know, what are you doing tonight for dinner?" And as luck would have it, my wife was in Florida at the time. So I said, I'm not doing anything. He said, "Can I please take you to dinner and drag you to see an act that's unsigned, but I think Capitol should really sign them ASAP." And I said, "Sure, why not?" So we went to dinner, and we went to the Troubadour where the act was playing. And I knew nothing about the act. He just told me, he said, this is an act that I think you're really going to like, and you're going to be shocked when you see the audience reaction. And boy, was I shocked, because from the minute the Knack took the stage until they ended, the place was pandemonium. Nobody sat in their chairs. Everybody stood, everybody rushed the stage, and everybody knew their songs. That's how big they were locally. And I thought the songs were incredibly dynamic, rock and roll songs. They were melodic. And for me, it was wonderful to see an act like that. After they had played, Bruce took me backstage to meet them. And they were like very, very, very gracious. And their lead singer and songwriter, Doug Feiger, said to me, you know, we're really looking at Capitol and this and that. I did not know at that time that he specifically really wanted to be at Capitol. And he wanted to be at Capitol because the Beatles legacy was there. And in fact, if you look at the album cover, Get the Knack, it parallels Meet the Beatles. And if you look at the label on the first album, it's the old Capitol label.
Yep, yep. That extended to the press kit too, because when they came to the press department and said, this is what we want the press kit to look like, and this is what we want in it, it was completely Beatlesque. Absolutely
Totally
inspired by something that Derek Taylor would have done.
Yeah, they really wanted to follow that path.
Yeah.
And when I came the next day after I saw them, and I came back into the tower, I remember walking to Don Zimmerman's office, which is right down the hall from promotion, and saying, I know I'm not an A&R, and I'm just a voice here in the tower in promotion, but I saw an act last night that, you know, I don't know who's looking to sign them. I didn't know at the time there was a bidding war, but I said, this act is incredible. And if we have the chance, we should really, really look at them. And I echoed the same thing up to Rupert and everybody I could. And of course, Bruce Ravid was doing the same thing. And we eventually did sign them. And I still believe to this day that the reason we got them was because we were the Beatles label.
It's just so obvious. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the second album didn't do so well. What was kind of tell us what happened with the second album? I remember there was a listening party, and the marketing and A&R folks and the PR staff all got together, listened to the second album, and it wasn't quite as impressive as the first. Tell us what happened after that.
Yeah, I don't remember what the time lag was between the first and the second album, whether it was 1 year or 2.
It was I think it was 1.
Yeah, I thought personally, just from a creative standpoint, that, you know, when you have the kind of success they had on My Sharona, and then they had another hit right after that with Good Girls Don't. That album, I think, did the 4 or 5 million.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether it was, it certainly wasn't Capitol putting pressure on them to say, we need another album in 1 year. But they delivered an album very fast. And there was a listening party, and they played the album. And it was apparent to everybody there, A&R, promotion, sales, marketing, everybody. There was no depth as far as hit singles went. And the lead track that we heard, which was called Baby Talks Dirty, we knew was going to be a problem at Top 40 radio because of the lyrics. And it didn't have the magic. When you heard My Sharona the very first time, it was magical.